I wondered if you wanted to discuss this relatively recent argument for the existence of God, or at the very least, a mind that's responsible for the structure of the universe. It's called the digital physics argument, and it's about 10 years old. It's written by Johann Ratz, and it was presented, kind of popularized by Mike Jones with Inspiring Philosophy.
Okay. And what exactly is the argument? Because I've heard 1,000 different arguments that there has to be some sort of mind behind the universe, and they all fail. So, like, which one is this? Like, how does this one separate from the rest?
Yeah, pretend we don't know what it is, because we don't.
Yeah. Like I said, I looked up digital physics, and what I've got here is it's a speculative idea that the universe can be conceived of as a vast digital computation device, or as the output of a deterministic or probabilistic computer program. That's what I found online. Is that the argument you're talking about? Is that we're all in a simulation, or what?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description.
So I mean, are you arguing that the universe is a simulation in a computer, or that it is similar or analogous to one, or like what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, I'd say that it is a simulation.
Okay, and how could we possibly disprove that?
How could we disprove it? Well, we would have had the opportunity to disprove it if the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen conjecture had held up, which was disproven in 1964.
How would that have disproven that we're living in a simulation?
Well, because it entails the idea of localistic effects, and as well as
which could very easily be programmed into a computer, right? You can make a computer program. So how would that have disproven that we're in a simulation? If that could be part of the simulation?
Well, because basically a simulation is a program, and if you have what you have with the program is it entails non-localistic effects. So, namely, the conservation of information.
So what if I made a program that runs with localistic effects as well? What if I had like Skyrim, and the physics are just slightly different in this zone than they are in that zone? And if I just go into this new area, things behave slightly differently because that's how I programmed it.
It's because the scenario that you're describing actually hides a more fundamental fact, is that if you're moving from one part of the program, so one part of the space of the game, into another region, which you're saying is different, the very possibility of that movement is underpinned by a common program. So the same program has to actually distribute over both. Yeah. Sure.
And so what I'm saying is that thing that you're talking about, this non-local, all these things. Why not just say that we made the program to look that way, or to run that way, and that there's a deeper underlying program that runs it that way?
Excuse me. I think the deeper underlying program is what's being pointed at by the argument.
As far as you can tell, okay, sure, but like there could be a program under it. Like that's the thing with this argument, is that if you're gonna say we're in a video game, that this is all the simulation, then you can easily say anything that we show whatsoever is part of that simulation. And if I disprove the simulation, that part of me disproving it was part of the simulation too. And if I wake up from the simulation and I'm now escaped from the simulation, no, you're not. You're in level 2 now of the simulation. The point is, what you're describing here is what we call an unfalsifiable claim. It's the same thing as saying, what if you're a brain in a jar that's being fed chemicals to make you think this is the world around you? It's the same thing as saying, what if you actually just started existing 5 minutes ago and all the memories that you have of the rest of your life are actually pre-programmed in? It's the same thing as saying, what if you're in a computer game? It's all of this same shit. What we know for sure is that we are experiencing reality. I think, therefore I am. We know we exist because we have thoughts and we have these experiences. But as far as the nature of reality, the underlying fabric of it, you have to be able to falsify what you're saying for it to be worth thinking about. And if there's no possible way for you to prove what you're saying is wrong, then it's not a valid argument for anything. Because I can very easily, you can say, oh, well, this is God. God's doing this thing. And I can very easily say, no, it's not. It's Rick Sanchez. And we're all in the car battery. You know, it's the exact same argument, and it means the exact same nothing. I'm sorry, Paul. I think you had something to say as well. I cut you off.
Well, that's all right. I was actually going to ask. So if you subscribe to this digital physics model, are you also subscribing then to a deterministic model of the universe?
Why? What?
Okay. What you
How?
started by saying that the universe was a sufficiently deterministic program. That's how you started this.
I didn't.
And I happen to
say
be a
deterministic.
determinist.
No, I read off the here. I'll open it back up again.
Oh, you read
this
off. Okay.
this thing that says that the output is deterministic or probabilistic computer programming, and you said that that's a good summary, Adam. You said that that's a good summary of what it is. So I said it was deterministic,
Right.
and you said yeah, totally. So, but
So,
even then, that begs the
I-
question: if it's all programmed in, how is it not determined?
Right, like I guess that's where I was going. Is like software by definition is deterministic. You said it out in the wild. I was a developer for a long time, even in the video game industry, and that's how all this works. And like you set it up and you let it go. And so I cannot. How is that? How is that? Even if we said, oh yeah, we're in a simulation, therefore God. Like I don't get it. I don't know where the ... is.
So okay, there's a few things that I have to respond to. So I mean, the first thing about determinism. So since I agreed to that description, I was basically thinking that this wasn't going to go in the direction of thinking about how decisions are made by conscious beings. So for the purpose of the argument, for the purpose of the argument, which I mean we've not gone through the premises, but for the purpose of the argument itself, I'm happy to agree to determinism, but my actual view is not deterministic. But the other points that you said were that a theory has to be falsifiable, and the other so was the first thing is that you said that it's got to be falsifiable. You also said it's sort of like saying I think therefore I am. Basically, I don't agree that a theory that purports to explain everything has to be falsifiable in the strict sense that you're saying. So a theory has to be falsifiable at the level of observation, so that there has to be the possibility that the theory is going to be disproven by instrumental measurement.
The other thing Forrest was getting at, though, on the flip side of falsifiability is unique predictions. If you can make unique future predictions of future data, that's what he was getting at, although I'm not in those words. So how does this digital model get us to unique future predictions of future data?
Okay, well, I mean, I can respond to that in a bit, but basically where I was headed was when. So, I mean, like you mentioned, I think therefore I am, and that's obviously not falsifiable. But if you're acknowledging that it's true, then you're also acknowledging that something unfalsifiable can be true. The sense in which falsifiability matters perfectly applies to the simulation hypothesis, or it's actually very closely related to quantum information theory, which is where this is all coming from.
You just said the words. You're summarizing. Pardon me, I'm paraphrasing what you said here, but you said. Basically, your point was that we have to accept that something unfalsifiable can be true. Did I hear you say that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Just really quickly, can you explain what falsifiability means so we're all on the same page?
In terms of empirical science, it means that there's a possibility of a measurement that would contradict the theory.
Not really a possibility of one. Just like that there is a way to do that. Like so let me explain this way, because it's very easy to get these words confused, right? Evolution is what I study. It's falsifiable, which means that if this thing happens, then evolution isn't true. If we find fossils that are in the wrong place in the fossil record, if we find DNA that just spontaneously comes out of nothing and has totally new traits that we can't trace back, that would be a way to say, okay, now evolution, probably isn't. If we see, like creationists like to say, a dog give birth to a duck, now we have, a pretty big problem with evolution, right? If those things happen, then evolution isn't true. That's falsifiability. What would have to happen for us to say that evolution isn't true? What would prove evolution false? It doesn't mean those things are possible. It doesn't mean those things are real. It doesn't mean those things are out there anywhere. It just means we know what it would take to prove this wrong. So when you say an unfalsifiable thing could be true, evolution is falsifiable, but it has yet to be falsified, right? there are ways that it could potentially, theoretically, hypothetically be proven wrong, and we can calculate that. We know what that is. That doesn't mean that they're possible, likely, any of that. It just, we know what it would take to prove this wrong. That's what falsifiability means, right? So when you say an unfalsifiable thing could be true, what I think you're saying, if I give you the benefit of the doubt, what I'm taking that is something can be true even if we can't find a way to falsify it. But what it sounds a lot more like you're saying is we don't actually need to worry about the logical responsibility of falsifiability. We can just decide that we want to believe this thing. And I want to make it very clear that that's not acceptable. Like, are we on the same page with that?
Not really. I'm sorry. I didn't mean the second thing that you said. I meant that falsifiability is a legitimate criteria for a theory, so long as it applies to experimental data.
No.
So what we instrumentally.
No. It's there's no but there. It is a necessary criteria for believing a thing. Period. It is a necessary criteria for something to be a scientific idea, for something to be something that you should actually stake your worldview on. You need to be able to say, well, at least I can test it a little bit. I can't, I can't go out and test the Big Bang right now from here in my office, but I know what kind of things would make it not make sense. And I don't see any of those things. So at least I have that going for me, right? With what you're talking about here, you don't have that. There's not a single thing that I could do to prove you wrong, because every single thing I offer you, you could just say, well, that's part of the simulation too. And you came up with some idea that, well, this thing that Einstein tested, that would have disproven the simulation. Like, no, as Paul explained, you can factor that in. You can easily code for that. So, like, there's not a single thing you can't run in a simulation, especially if you're in the simulation and the rules of the simulation are the only rules you can possibly imagine. Like, you have an unfalsifiable claim. That means you don't need to do the hard work of thinking with it, and that's a problem.
So there's a couple of things I kind of need to clarify the position that I'm coming from, because you're going on about stuff that I don't think. So the problem is that when I say that it's something can be unfalsifiable and true, this basically pertains to certain levels of formal systems. Namely, it's what ultimately would be demanded of a theory of everything. What you would end up with is something that there's no measurable contradiction to, or no measurable case in which the theory of everything would be false, because a theory of everything basically has two criteria, which are the same criteria as the scientific method, which is distinguishability and replicability. And for it to be replicable, it has to be true everywhere. And so there would be no condition under which it would be proven false. So when the idea of falsifiability, you didn't follow what Forrest said.
You didn't. I'm sorry. I know.
You didn't follow what Forrest said. A theory of everything absolutely would be very falsifiable, because if you found one thing that the theory of everything didn't explain, it is no longer a theory of everything. So the fact that what you're trying to say is, if we successfully found this theory of everything, nothing would contradict it, but something potentially could contradict it. There's a logical possibility of something that would contradict even the best theory of everything. Yes. The fact that we found a theory that explains everything doesn't negate our ability to imagine a thing that would contradict it. So with your theory, you're trying to say, look, I am willing to accept something without falsification criteria, and if that's the way you want to live your life, awesome. Great, you can do that. The trouble is, if you want to go convince someone else that my non-falsifiable idea is better than your non-falsifiable idea, you're just in the realm of preference and choice, right? You're into the one that, well, I like this one better because it suits me, or it feeds my intuition, or something. And what we're hoping you were going to call up with this argument for God, meaning this argument is more than just describing a thing that I prefer. It's a thing that you should believe along with me. And I think that's the part you're skipping. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think you summarized it really well, because that's the thing. You can say an unfalsifiable thing can possibly true. Sure. let's say hypothetically, there's a thing out there that's unfalsifiable and it is true, magical. That doesn't mean there's a good reason to believe it. Like, if it's not falsifiable, there's no good reason to believe it. That's what we're coming from. And if we did have a grand theory of every single thing in the universe, that would still be falsifiable, because we could say, if I find a planet that orbits a star in a perfect triangle, then my theory doesn't work. It doesn't matter if it encompasses everything. That's clearly a new thing that shouldn't happen, so it doesn't work. Doesn't mean that it's likely, doesn't mean that it's possible. It means if this happens, this theory doesn't work, no matter how big or vast it is. Do you understand where we're coming from now?
No, I understand where you're coming from. I understood before as well. But what I think is happening is a distinction is being missed, which is that there's an experimental level of unfalsifiability, which is the one that that we agree on, that you're saying is a criteria for a theory of everything. And I agree that it's a theory, a criteria for that theory. But what I'm trying to say is, when you talked about unfalsifiability before, when you mentioned I think therefore I am, this is the formal. This is the kind of unfalsifiability that a formal theory has, which is not it's not pertainable to instrumental science. So, for example, I mean, the strongest example is just logic itself. You can't falsify logic, because logic is what does the falsifying. So the rules, if you're falsifying something, when you expose something to be falsifiable or unfalsifiable, in either those two situations, you're using a set of rules, which is logic, which themselves are immune to falsification. So
they absolutely know. If we found that A was not equal to A in our universe, then we would falsify. Then we would falsify the laws of logic. The laws of logic work because, just like a scientific law, they are merely observations for which we have found no exception.
Right.
I disagree. So if you found in quotation marks, if you found that A was not equal to A, you're just uttering a contradiction, which falls under the definition of being false. And so what you're doing is you're just expressing a paradox, but the paradox is resolved by just reapplying logic. And when you're saying it's observational, it's really not observational, because everything that you observe is either true or false.
We're kind of talking in circles at this point, where like we're just getting into this weird nitty gritty about like the minutia of logic and all these little things. I ate before the show. I'm full. I don't want any word salad. So instead, I'm just going to ask you a completely different question, and we'll see how that goes, because we've been on this call for about 20 minutes now. So I'm going to ask you something completely different, and we're going to see if we can get anywhere with that, and cross our fingers, right? So why do you believe in a God?
Well, I'd say logic.
Cool.
I mean, an example is the argument that I was going to present.
Yeah, no, give us your absolute best argument that shows us that there is a God that we should believe in. What is it?
Well, I'll just present the argument that I was going to present. So, the conclusion is that a mind is responsible for the structure of the universe. So that the universe is a simulation in a mind, and this follows from the universe is a simulation, and that simulations can only exist on a computer and ultimately in a mind.
Cool. Any evidence for absolutely any of that you'd like to present us?
Oh well, I mean, there's lots of evidence that the universe is a simulation.
Like what?
I mean, it's the fact that as physicists have tried to find a theory of quantum gravity, they've basically converged on the consensus that space-time is emergent. So it's not a fixed array, and that basically physical particles they're emerging along with it, right? So most of this comes from the quantum entanglement experiments that were done in 1969 and that won the Nobel Prize, which showed that basically information is conserved, that the information of physical states, they're conserved. So if you
just out of curiosity here, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but you're talking about quantum physics and quantum gravity. I'm a biologist. It's a little bit outside of my scope. What I do want to look up, I just found this study in Nature Nature journal, the most prestigious science journal in the world, one of them, showing the rates of religiosity among scientists. Biologists have the lowest rate of belief in God at 5.5%. Hey, and then physicists and astronomers are just slightly higher at 7.5%. 7.5% of physicists believe in a God. So you're saying that our recent understanding of physics is proof that there is a simulation that's running the world, and the simulation is a God that's happening. It's like your belief in God comes from what you believe is proof from physics. Why do you think only 7.5% of actual physicists believe in God if you think physics proves God?
Well, I don't have
Do you
to
think
explain.
maybe they understand it a little bit more?
I mean, I don't have to explain what other people think.
No, of course not. I'm just asking you, do you think your understanding of quantum physics is somehow you know something that these people don't? That 93%, 92.5% of them who understand this stuff and went to college to learn this stuff don't believe you, but you understand quantum physics so well that you know something that 92.5% of physicists don't understand.
I think it's a matter of focus and what you take interest in. Some people have a very keen interest in philosophy, which I do, and I come at physics from the standpoint of philosophy, and that doesn't necessarily.
Do you have any formal training in physics at all?
No, just high school.
Okay, so you are a high school philosopher who is learning a little bit of physics on his own, and you think that you're seeing something here that 92.5% of physicists don't see who went to school to learn physics. Is that what I'm getting?
I mean, if there's something I missed, you have to point it out.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, because I asked your best argument for God, and you said, oh, well, quantum physics has really shown us there has to be a simulation and there has to be a God. Here's these people who actually study quantum physics, who actually know what it is and went to college to learn it, and now are professionals in the field. You learned a little bit in high school, and now you're a philosopher. What are you seeing that the professional physicists aren't seeing, is the question.
Well, I think that a lot of them are seeing it. I mean, there's Edward Fredkin, who wrote a paper on the universe being a computer. There's John Wheeler, who put forward the it from bit theory, that every physical state is a bit or a byte, and that was in 1990.
Do either of those papers end with "therefore God" or include "therefore God" in the summary of the paper?
Any part of that?
Well, that's why I mentioned focus and what you take interest in. Some people can, people compartmentalize things in their minds, and my interest, like I said, comes from philosophy and things like when I take a look at, say, for example, the Chinese room argument from John Searle. I just look at these physical facts and I just embed it into what I know about philosophy, and the conclusions follow from there.
Just
so
out
is
of
this
curiosity,
an elaborate?
Adam. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, this sounds like look at the trees, which is what I was raised with in my evangelical days all the time. This is just a very slight variation on look at the tree. If you understood the tree, it would be obvious to you that God made it. And it seems to you're really relying on someone's intuition. You actually said it outright. It's what are you interested in? What's your philosophy? You're just in. If your intuition tells you that that this needs a God, then you see it. And if your intuition is different, then you don't see it. And we're back to this non-falsifiable. So we're back to two entirely non-falsifiable ideas. Forrest and I are looking for ways that we can pick your idea over our idea. We'd love to. But you haven't presented anything to help us. You're just basically telling us, I like this idea. It resounds with me. And we're saying, well, it doesn't resound with us. So we're left nowhere.
Right. And what gets me is that, like, it's not impossible at all for somebody who isn't an expert in a field to come up with a breakthrough idea. That happens. Whenever I talk about, like, what do you know that the physicists don't know? I'm not saying that by getting a physics degree, you are now an authority in all things in the physical world and you know every single thing forever. It's just a whole hell of a lot more likely, right? So, like me, I went to school, I earned several degrees in biology. Biology is my job, it's my passion, it's the thing that I learn about every day. It's more likely that I'm going to know a thing about biology than somebody who than a physicist. Somebody who studied physics for as long as I've studied biology might not know the biology shit that I know, and I certainly don't know the physics shit that they know. Does it mean that I would never make a discovery in physics or they would never make a discovery in biology? Of course not. That's very possible, and shit like that's happened before. But it's very, very improbable, right? So, like, when you come here and say, I'm a philosopher and I learned some physics in high school, and these PhD physicists, these master's level physicists, even these bachelor's or associate's level physicists, these people who are actually learning this stuff, they don't see what I see because they're coming at it from the wrong angle. I wonder if you hear how that sounds and just how unlikely that is. For example, Adam, if you were to come down with cancer right now, if you found out, oh my God, body's, I've got some sort of cancer, whatever it is, and you went to a doctor and the doctor said, yeah, well, we need to start you on chemotherapy, radiation, we need to look at surgery options, all these things. But then here's Mike, and Mike's an air conditioning tech. And Mike comes over and says, listen, I've been working on air conditioners for a little while. I learned a little bit about cancer in high school. I think these doctors really just aren't seeing the big picture here. I have a different perspective on it. And what you need to be doing is eating more apples. Apples, it says right there, apples a day keeps the doctor away. And that says it for if you eat the apples, your lungs are going to be free of cancer. You're going to be just fine. How likely are you to believe Mike over the doctors, right? Like that's what we're coming with here. Is you're giving us some weird new perspective on reality that over 90% of physicists disagree on and saying, well, you know more than the physicist. Like, how is that likely?
I have to respond to what Paul last said to me. I'm sorry,
sure.
but
hope you're responding to both.
When you're saying that I'm basing my belief in God on intuition, I'm sorry, but that you kind of mixed together two things that I wasn't saying. So when I mentioned focus and what you take interest in, that was a response to Forrest's question about why I think the physicists don't believe in God. Right? I wasn't talking about why I think that. Right? The reason why I think is because of the arguments in favor. But what I wasn't saying that I'm intuiting that God exists. I was just making a judgment about why Forrest says that 96% or 95% of physicists don't believe. I'm just using my own experience of what I take interest in to be the explanatory factor in why there's a difference between me and the physicist. That's all I'm saying.
So you literally just saying that they, because of your interest, they don't consider this question. And if they would take time to consider this question, they would come to the same conclusion that you did. That seems to be what you're saying.
Yes, some of them would, I think.
So 97% of physicists, 92% of physicists, the God question is unimportant to them.
I think that when we're forming our beliefs, we're guided by our will and what we're interested in knowing. And if I think that a physicist who takes a very keen interest in philosophy, who also is clarified on what this simulation hypothesis with physics, I think that they'll put things together and that they'll conclude, what's responsible for the universe.
You're literally saying that you listed a couple papers, and those papers don't insist that the God is a necessary conclusion. So the people who know even this theory the best don't naturally come to that conclusion. No, but I understand. But you're trying to tell us that we should naturally come to this conclusion based on this world being a thing. So you're mixing multiple ingredients now. We need to not only accept this new theory of physics, but then bring in other philosophies that are also unestablished. Like you're layering on the improbabilities. The Occam's razor here doesn't seem to fit. Anyway, I don't know, Forrest, have we talked around this one enough?
Yeah, it's been about 30 minutes, and that was about as long as I wanted to give it. We've been talking past each other for a little while, and Adam, I would like to know if you have anything to say about the thing that I said as well, because I gave you a whole thing, and you jumped back over to Paul, which is fine. Paul made a good point, and I'm glad you addressed it. But just, would you rather trust a doctor with your medical health, or would you rather trust an air conditioning tech who learned some medical stuff in high school and thinks that the doctors just aren't seeing things the way that he's seeing things? Which do you think is the most likely way to get good medical advice?
Well, you're confusing what we should be getting advice on, right? So in your analogy,
it's an analogy. I'm giving an analogous situation. It's a different thing. In your situation, you're talking about advice on God. In my situation, I'm talking about advice on, say, cancer. So where should you get your advice on cancer? Is it from a guy who learned some stuff in high school and then went to a completely different career? Or is it from a doctor?
If we're asking questions about physics, we should ask physicists. If we're asking questions about philosophy, we should ask philosophers.
Right.
If we're asking questions about medical stuff, we should ask doctors.
So here we are now with you giving us a lecture on physics and why it points to God, and I don't understand why you don't see that as incredibly arrogant.
I mean, I don't have an opinion on whether or not it's arrogant. I mean, I hope I'm not coming across as arrogant.
I figured as a philosopher, you have an opinion on everything.
A quick search on how many philosophers believe in God. It seems to be 14%.
There you go.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you're the rare one. You're the only philosopher in the whole wide world who gets physics super well and philosophy super well. And now here you are proving us all that God's real because a simulation is real that you can't prove isn't real. Like, you don't see a problem with any of this at all?
I mean, thank you. I mean, I appreciate the compliment. But, I mean, if I'm in the minority, then I'm discussing this with you so that I'm no longer in the minority.
Right.
I'm
no,
hoping to be
being in the minority doesn't mean that you're necessarily incorrect. I need you to understand here. Have you had any formal training in philosophy either? Did you go to college for philosophy?
No.
What's your highest level of education?
I have a doctorate in molecular biology.
Microbiology. Okay.
Molecular biology.
Molecular biology. And you're a philosopher who thinks he knows physics, is what you're telling me.
Well, I mean, I hope I'm presenting the physics as a physicist would present it, and that's what I hope, so that the argument can receive the best support that it can get.
What's killing me here is if you actually have a PhD, which I man, you're sounding more and more like a troll, but like if you actually had one, like I feel like they would have taught you to avoid this kind of thing, because like all my grad school was like how not to talk outside of your bubble, and like very weird that you're not getting that. Anyway, we're gonna go and move on there. Yeah, go ahead, bud, Paul.
But Adam, next time Forrest is on this show, you two could have had a half-hour conversation about biology. That would have been amazing.
It would have been dope.
So
the shit of it is, I study evolution, I study bioanthropology, I study biomedical science. I'm not a microbiologist. So even though I have a background in that, I wouldn't be talking about details about microbiology, because even though that's in the biological field, it's a little outside of my scope. So I wouldn't put myself in that position, because that'd be a very arrogant thing to do. Whatever, it's fine. Adam, thanks so much for calling. I hope you call sometime again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Be radical.
I'm sorry.
No, take care.